talk about the democracy and challenges for it. One of the clearest signs of the deep shift in today's world is the growing loss of trust in institutions. More and more people believe that our systems are broken beyond repair, that we need to tear everything down and start from scratch. And sometimes media intentionally or not add to this feeling of distrust. And so we must ask, how can our institutions survive in such a chaotic world? How can media still guide people when emotions seem stronger than facts? How can media, civil society keep holding institutions to account while also helping to protect them? But we'll discuss definitely more and more, so I don't want to steal the stage. And so please, it's my honor to welcome our speakers, our guests, Anne Applebaum, who is a staff writer at the Atlantic and a senior fellow in Center for Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, historian, commentator on international affairs with a particular focus on Eastern Europe and authoritarianism. Dorka Takácsy researches specializing in disinformation propaganda across Central Eastern Europe and Russia. She currently serves as a visiting fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States and a research fellow at the Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy. And Yevhen Hlibovytsky, Ukrainian expert in long-term strategies and communications, co-founder and head of the Frontier Institute. He serves on the supervisory board of the National Public Broadcasting Company of Ukraine, and his research explores how cultural factors shape Ukraine's development path. So the stage is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think I'm going to explode because I have so many questions to our incredible panelists. And the reason is probably not pure curiosity, but rather anxiety. You know, we are coming into a dangerous world that becomes more dangerous as we make every following step. And let's talk about both national and international perspectives. So I will be asking the questions with regard to both. And the questions that are coming from me are probably the questions that are coming from a lot of Ukrainians, because being in the disposition where we are right now, Ukrainians are dying, Ukrainians are fighting, Ukrainians are suffering, while there is a slow awakening process that will or will not succeed in the EU. There is a question whether we can rely on the existing international frameworks for security like NATO. Does Article 5 work or not? It's a good question. So let us try and see what did we miss and what we did not see. And Dorka Takácsy, I would like to direct first question to you. With Hungary being a country that had its own revolution in 1956, with a remarkable peaceful transition of power that happened in 1989, with the incredible economic reforms and social and political reforms, and the current prime minister being one of the Democrats that actually heralded the new age. How did we end where we are? What did we miss?
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for the invitation. Well, I'm sad to say that you are not the only anxious person here. I'm also one of them, and not only because I'm on stage. So, well, when we are talking about Hungary, and I guess that our discussion's topic today is somewhat broader. This is about the erosion of the institutions, trust in institutions, and how does that impact our media environment, journalistic standards whatsoever. And for this topic, Hungary, unfortunately, is a very good cautionary tale. So I would like to tell you a little cautionary tale about why you should save your institutions so that then the institutions can save you. Because this is something which we unfortunately have missed to do. We failed to do it in Hungary, and now we are suffering the consequences of all that. So what happened? How did we arrive to where we are at now? Because if you look at Hungary, you can clearly see that something is strange there. Something is weird. Hungary is somewhat an outlier, absolutely and very harshly differing from the mainstream, not only with regards to its stance with regards to Ukraine, but also if you look at its whole foreign policy and its policies in many other aspects, you can see that something is weird there. There are many things which are weird there, but for instance, the fact that the media environment has become something absolutely unimaginable before is one of the reasons which enables it all to happen. So what happened was that when our currently ruling regime, the Orban regime, came to power, eventually it came back to power because there has already been an Orban government before, from 98 to 2002, then they were in opposition for 8 years. And when they came back to power in 2010, they came back to power with a goal, with a vision, and with a desire for revenge against the media elites and for revenge against the whole media. Because how they perceived it was that, well, last time when we were in government, around like 2000, we were governing so well, but unfortunately that wasn't enough because of the evil media. So what we have to do now in 2010, coming back to power, we have to make a shift, we have to take over. And how this takeover went down was that, first of all, they have created a new media law. It was possible because in 2010, when they came back with a landslide victory, which has provided them with a constitutional majority. This constitutional majority is in Fidesz's hands ever since, because ever since they have not only been able to rewrite the constitution and to modify it several times, but they are also able to rewrite and to modify the electoral law every single time they please, and they keep continuing doing so. So this is why this constitutional majority is eventually in effect ever since. Plus, as a nice instance, basically Hungary is being governed by decree since 2016, now under the pretext of the war in Ukraine. So this is about the legal environment. But what happened in 2010? I already have mentioned this desire for taking a revenge. This new media law has also established a new media council which serves as an authority and which has been stuffed with Fidesz loyalists appointed for 9 years. What happened afterwards, that in every single other step, which was absolutely conscious, went according to a plan. Now it's clearly visible with all the media takeover, changing the ownership structures and changing many other things. This all could go down because this media council, which was already reshuffled, already filled up with loyalists, this media council has turned a blind eye over everything. So what happened was that since 2010, step by step, I'm not going to bore you with the details of it now, but since 2010, a monstrous large structure, a propaganda empire, was established. This propaganda empire consists over 480 outlets. These are both online outlets, offline outlets, print, whatever you can imagine, but it's over 480. These 480 outlets are under the direct or indirect influence of the government, and they operate with coordinated messages. So when there is an enemy picture, when the government pinpoints at someone and creates a scapegoat, which for instance at the moment is Ukraine for the governmental rhetorics, this message is actually going through very easily because there is this enormous empire which works according to coordinated messages. They are incredibly impactful. Of course, there are also independent outlets which are doing a really great job. They are heroic, underfinanced, struggling, as the press does in many other places as well, but obviously they cannot be a counterweight to a large propaganda empire which works with coordinated messages and endless funding. So what happened was that basically this was created, also the public broadcasters were taken over. Just imagine if BBC's leadership was from one day to the other simply dismissed, and it would have been reshuffled and refilled by government loyalists. It would be quite a scandal, right? Well, in 2010, this happened to a far bigger extent at the Hungarian public broadcasters. If you go down almost to the level of janitors, people were changed, people were missed, and it was all refilled according to the needs and the desires of the government. So there is this empire of over 480 outlets. There are the public broadcasters, radios, TVs, and all this, plus also the loyalists in the media council. So altogether, the whole environment has changed drastically. And obviously, it all has enabled now a situation where it's very, very difficult to do anything, simply because how do you make a counterweight to all that?
You mentioned something that I think is very important. You're talking about revenge. The Orban that returned was not the same Orban who was before. I think one of the themes of the US elections was that, you know, we've been under Trump as the 45th president of the United States, so, you know, it was not that damaging. And then the Trump administration as the 47th president is actually quite different in how it approaches the policy and in what it does. Is revenge something, and this is my question to Anne Applebaum, is revenge something that we should be looking at? Is this an indicator that we should all pay attention to, you know, from the point of view of media or think tanks? Is this a factor?
So first of all, yes, it's a pleasure to be here. I think this is the most elegant bomb shelter I've ever been in. It's really very beautifully designed and lit, and I'm very impressed by it. And I've been in a lot of them, and this one is really nice. So thank you for organizing that. Look, you know, the example of Orban, the example of Trump are not unlike the example of Hugo Chavez, who tried to do a coup d'etat, then was in prison, then came back. Very often it's the case that leaders who lose and then return have a very different agenda on their second time in power. And that was clear to me, actually, during this election campaign, that Trump was going to be very different this time around, particularly having carried out an assault on the Capitol and a failed attempt to overthrow the results of the election. But you're right, a lot of Americans underrated this piece of his psyche and of his followers' psyche. And I think it's true that he himself is personally interested in revenge, and he appealed to a very, whatever strain of resentment and anger is out there, whatever it was that people were angry at, and it could be many different things. It could be everything from very rich people that they're angry at, to their mother-in-law, to their boss at work, to the person who fired them. Whatever it was that people resented, he appealed to it. And it's resentment. I mean, there's a French term, ressentiment. I mean, it means the same thing, but it's been used very often to describe what it is that motivates authoritarians and what is their appeal. And I don't want to do too many historical comparisons, but you don't have to look back very far. You can look, as I said, at Venezuela in the 1990s, or you can look at Germany or in the 1930s, or you can look at the Dreyfus affair, older than that, and you can see that that politicians who build their appeal on deep anger at whichever elite they decide to name as the elite very often win. And you have that in America, and you have also the other phenomenon that I think people misunderstood was that during his first term, Trump was still surrounded most of the time by relatively, I don't want to use the word mainstream because it's got the wrong connotation, but relatively educated and prepared officials. So people who'd been in government before, people who'd been in the Pentagon, people who'd been in the Army, people who'd run mainstream businesses. These were people who understood how the economy worked, and they were in their purpose for joining the Trump administration was still essentially to do something for Americans and to make the American government work better. I'm not saying they succeeded or failed, but that was their motivation. Instead, what's happened in the last 4 years is that Trump, out of power, as a figure who had rejected the American political system, has now attracted to himself very different people. And these are people who I would say are not conservatives. I mean, it's a really misnomer to use this idea of conservative or right-wing to describe them. Instead, he's attracted to himself people who, for different reasons, dislike the American political system and want to overthrow it or change it radically. And so that includes both these kind of tech authoritarians from Silicon Valley who want the US to be run like a business. It includes Christian nationalists who want to end secular government and replace it with religious government. It includes people who want a reversal of social changes since the 1960s, including civil rights laws. All those people who were outside of the bounds of politics for the last 50 years were attracted to Donald Trump, and he's now brought them into the White House. People who were against vaccines, for example. So it's not all political. It's also people who are on the margins of all kinds of professions. And so what you have now is a White House and an administration composed of people who dislike or resent or hate, not just not just in a metaphorical sense, but actually the institutions that they're working for, whether it's the CIA or whether it's the healthcare system or something else. So what you're seeing now is people from within attacking the state itself and the institutions themselves. And this comes as a surprise to many people who were expecting something different. But again, if you were watching carefully, if you understood what happened over the last 4 years, it shouldn't have been surprising at all.
What's the rationale behind this? I mean, why would you dismantle the mechanism of, for instance, healthcare?
Because you think vaccines are evil and you want them to be taken away and children not to take them.
So basically, this means that the society is losing the measurement scale for its own success, right?
Yes.
And, we've seen that with Brexit in Britain. We've seen that in other places where basically societies opted for something that was not to their benefit, but actually was harmful.
In this case, you also have, I won't say everybody, but quite a few people who are in this administration are also in it not because they're hoping to do something on behalf of the American people or make America prosperous, but because they have personal financial interests in controlling some piece of government. And this is something I think Ukrainians understand. Yeah.
Does that mean that they believe that the system is so strong that it will survive their...
No, they want the system to be undermined and destroyed.
So, but if there will be a destruction of the system, whatever they stole or whatever benefits they got will also be under stress.
I didn't know if they thought that many steps ahead. I mean...
So basically, because I'm looking at this as, imagine I was a newspaper editor, So I'm asking myself, what do I have to make visible for my audience? What are the things that I have to follow? Should I actually focus more on theory of change? Should I focus more on resentment? Should I focus more on revenge? Should I focus more on what comes next in case there won't be, for instance, water purification?
I mean, I think the job of journalism in America now, which is, by the way, the main difficulty in journalism, and I know this from working at a magazine that is quite prosperous now. It makes money. It has quite a lot of journalists working for it, but still has this constant feeling that we can't cover everything. We know about stories that we don't have the time or capacity to cover. So the main challenge is knowing what to do. There are so many different pieces of the puzzle. There's, as I described, you could write about vaccines and healthcare and the healthcare department. You can write about kleptocracy and the different people stealing money. You could write about the changes in foreign policy. You could write about what's going on in civil rights. The main job of journalists, though, is first of all, whatever it is that you choose to write, to seek to investigate and establish what actually happened, as opposed to what the various propagandists say is happening. And that's very important right now. And secondly, to build some relationship of trust with your readers. You need it's not enough just to write an article and then put it on a website and sit back and relax. You now are obligated to create whether it's on social media or whether it's through you're creating a kind of club around your readers, or whether it's through doing public events, or there are many different methods that are used. You are now obligated to seek to build a community of people who want to read and understand and what you say. So it's not enough just to write or just to speak. You also need to seek actively to create some kind of trust, because we're now at a moment when literally every day, the President of the United States lies. He goes on TV and he says things that aren't true. And he does it repeatedly, he does it all the time. He says the price of petrol has gone down when in fact it's gone up. He says, he claims to have, achieved peace between India and Pakistan, and the Indian government says he had nothing to do with it. So constant lying means that there needs to be a daily attempt to write things that are true, but also to create bonds of trust with people who are willing to listen to it. It's a very, very difficult job. I'm not saying that it's simple at all.
So basically what it means is that the job description for the editor, for the journalist, has become more sophisticated, because you don't only have to follow basically the standards and procedures of journalism per se, but you basically also have to have expertise in what you're writing about. You have to see the underwater currents. Is this what the Hungarian media missed?
That's a very good question, but frankly speaking, I was just thinking about something else. You asked about, for instance, what might be the intentions on purposefully ruining the healthcare system. So on the one hand, I think that when such an authoritarian takeover happens, on the one hand, it is very much strategic and thought through. So for instance, when we see all the decrees being launched, several a day, obviously we can see the clear goal there, that so many outrageous and scandalous things come out in one single day that journalists don't even know what to grab first, because otherwise, if things went business as usual, each of them would be enough of scandal for a month. Okay, probably in the later times, now probably a scandal for a week, but still, there we go. So this is very conscious to flood the public life, to flood all this common space we have with so many things that you give extra tasks to journalists so that they should even dig out first what they have to tear to pieces later. On the other hand, we can see this strategic thinking here, but on the other hand, I think that oftentimes it's not simply revenge, but also not the inability to understand complex systems altogether. Because if you are an autocrat, or if you have such intentions, most likely you are convinced that you know better. All these other stupid people who believe in complex things, you just don't believe in it. And if you don't believe in it, it simply means that you don't understand the consequences. You don't understand what the consequences of your actions are going to be. And I think that we can see clear examples for that. And not only from the first 100 years of the Trump administration, when there were many things which had to be suddenly revoked or tried to be revoked because, well, apparently there are consequences to the actions. So on the one hand, they are very strategic. On the other hand, probably sometimes we overestimate them because they themselves are not aware of the consequences of their actions. And worse, they just don't care. So whether this was a thing which we missed in Hungary, it's a very good question, because now that if I think back to all these steps which were taken, obviously there were major steps, there were major milestones. So for instance, the creation of the new media law, the media council, and these things which I have mentioned, these were major milestones on this sad trajectory. But otherwise, there were also smaller steps which I think we simply didn't recognize in time. Probably because they were, yet again, just like we see now, on a bigger stage, worldwide, when too many things happen and there are already not enough of journalists, the sector is already underfunded, they are all overrun, and you can understand them, of course, because we are all humans. So for such a sector, it's very difficult to see all the complexity of certain things. Plus also there are definitely external factors too, because in certain other cases, when the problems were already visible in Hungary, not as bad as now, but close. So when the problems were big enough, many of these problems were flagged to the different organs and institutions of the EU. And the EU was often simply slow, too slow, and then when there was a political will missing from the outside, you can flag whatever you want, but certain steps were also missed from there. And now looking back, it all comes together. Obviously now it's easier to see it through and see all the trajectory which we have undergone and which we went under. But yeah, so when it was in the making, I think that we have missed certain steps.
Does that mean that we basically see a kind of religious comeback when people do not necessarily apply rational thinking, but they just apply what they believe in? And this is not necessarily about God. This is about, vaccines and whatever. So is this a challenge to rationalism as an approach which was predominant in the educational system, in the promotion system, in any governance that we've seen in the developed world over the 20th, 21st century?
Yes. I mean, I think what we're seeing not just in the US, but in many places, is actually a challenge to Enlightenment thinking. In other words, that there is such a thing as, there is a difference between things that are true and not true, that there is a scientific method that can find out whether things are true, that there are agreed upon institutions, whether scientific journals, whether journalism, whether government bodies and agencies that can be trusted to at least to try to find out what's true and to have to do so in good faith. And we find instead people completely rejecting those things under the banner of do your own research. I wrote about this a few months ago. I was writing about the Romanian election. And this was about the candidate Georgescu, who was the one who won the first round some months ago, and then the election after that was banned. If you looked very closely at who he was and what he was saying, he was somebody who described himself as a spiritual person, anointed by God, who had special powers. He filmed himself swimming in a lake. It seemed to be very, I don't know whether it was a real film or whether it was AI. It was very cold outside, and he said that, my belief in God keeps me from becoming ill while I'm swimming in this cold lake. It was snowing outside. And he's also somebody who rejected vaccines. And his appeal was to a kind of anti-rational, not just anti-institutional, anti-rational, anti-science frame of mind. RFK Jr., who is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the United States, has a very similar kind of appeal. It's anti-rational, and this is something certainly, interestingly, and I leave you all to draw the conclusions. I mean, both RFK and Georgescu have also expressed pro-Russian and pro-Putin feelings at different times. Georgescu, we know, has been openly pro-Russian in his attitude to Ukraine and in talking about Putin, and we also know that he was supported illegally by a social media campaign funded, we don't know how. I won't make the same claim about RFK, although who knows. So there is a clear and concerted attempt to win over people who no longer trust scientific thinking. And there is a link between that and between authoritarian thinking. And all these things are a little vague. I don't want to draw clear lines, but they are connected.
Well, basically, if you're talking about the times of endarkment, if we could say so, that means that if lack
obscurantism, it was called. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're talking about lack of efficiency that such approach would have, then it's all but natural for the autocrats to limit the competition to preserve themselves with whatever inefficient policies they're offering, because otherwise they would be swept at the next elections, or they would be swept.
The problem is even deeper than that. I mean, democracy itself, especially American democracy, but democracy itself is a kind of Enlightenment project. So the idea of democracy is that we've created this system, it has rules, And the rules allow us to have debates about reality, and through those debates to decide what government policy will be, right? So democracy requires that there be some agreed upon reality. You know, you can be right wing or left wing, or you can have an opinion that there should be, you know, more highways or less highways, but you have to agree on the number of highways. You have to have some way of counting them. Once you don't agree, once there's no shared reality, then you can't really have democratic debate. And then the system doesn't work. And autocracy appeals instead to this deeply irrational, you know, we need a leader who somehow embodies the will of the people, not through measured debate or not through some voting, but he just has emerged from the people and he expresses, you know, vola narodu, you know, will of the people. And this is, I mean, Trotsky used to talk like this, and Lenin spoke like this, and Stalin spoke like this. You know, it doesn't belong, this isn't an idea that belongs to the right or the left. Obviously, Hitler spoke like this, you know. And so the idea that the autocrat has some magical link, he makes good decisions just because he somehow represents us. You know, this is anti-enlightenment, anti-rational, and anti-democratic. Democracy needs this basis in the real world, or it doesn't work. And that is, you know, if you want to get to the deepest layer and the deepest problem that we have today, I think that's it.
My question is about the experience of the country that is in the very Central Europe, that has been part of the European cultural discourse all along. And was there lack of sense of urgency that, you know, we're a member of European Union, nothing bad's going to happen to us because we will be, you know, protected one way or the other through the instruments of the European Union or NATO or whatever, you know. Was there a lack of understanding that the house may be on fire?
I think clearly so. So if you look at what the Hungarian population thinks about the Western institutional systems, which we are members of, they are still overwhelmingly having positive attitudes and opinions. So they still, even though we can see decades of anti-Western, anti-Brussels, and you name it, kind of propaganda, you can look at the public opinion polls and you can see that still the overwhelming majority of Hungarian people has a positive opinion about the EU. But if you dig deeper and ask these people, so then what do you like about the EU? Why do you think it's important for us? They have very, very down-to-earth explanations and very, very palpable examples. So eventually, why they still like it is actually, it has nothing to do with values, nothing to do with any higher goal or liberties, freedom, anything like that. What it boils down to is that, well, I can work in another country, it's easier for me to cross the border, and pretty much that's it. If EU funds come as well, that's also a plus, but this is it. So I think that it's a mistake to think that even if we see these numbers, that the overwhelming majority of Hungarian people have still a positive attitude towards the EU, that it means that they are still European citizens and have this citizen mentality. Unfortunately, I think that there is another thing. This is practicality. And getting back to the question about whether autocracies automatically lead and automatically head to the direction because of their bad policies that they have to restrict the competition, I think this is clearly visible. Also on the example of Hungary. So for instance, if you look at Hungary, for many years there has been an economic prosperity, not independently from the fact that Hungary has benefited tremendously from the EU accession. Hungary has received really a lot of cohesion funds whatsoever. So for a long time, there was a very lucky period recently in Hungarian history when you could see that even though the policies taken by the government were not really good policies, the results of them were not palpable yet, because there were all these other funds which still gave the people the impression and the feeling that, well, okay, things are going well for me, so, well, there are these weird things with media, there is this weird propaganda, okay, maybe I don't even like it, but if I look at my pockets, I'm still fine, I'm voting for Fidesz. And eventually, this kind of magic is broken now. Not independently from the fact that now the overwhelming majority of EU funds are being frozen. And at this moment, okay, this moment has come already 2 years ago or so, at this moment, it becomes clear what kind of policies you have taken. And what we can see that the economic policies, for instance, and social policies alike, and many other policies in Hungary were not good. But this kind of bad quality of policies for a very long time did not really have a palpable impact. Now this impact is palpable. So what do you do in this situation? Well, if your budget is in a good shape enough, you can, of course, share money to the people and hope that they will vote for you. This doesn't seem to be a viable option now. This is why the propaganda empire is actually pushing the gas and amplifying its work, amplifying its narratives, and puts extra funds in the propaganda. Because if you cannot give money to the people so that they vote for you, well, you have to amp up the propaganda, and this is what we see now, and this is not the only thing we see now. In Hungary, there is an entirely new situation now since last year. Before that, there was a fragmented opposition, which has actually run at elections in different constellations. Independently, in a united way, none of those has led to success, as you can see, this uninterrupted 15 years of Fidesz power. But last year, something interesting has happened, and a new challenger arose. So now, if you look at, yet again, the public opinion polls, they are being measured neck to neck with Fidesz. This is a party which is not represented in the Hungarian parliament yet, because it was obviously created after the last parliamentary elections we had in 2022. But now the situation is something pretty interesting, because apparently there is enough of frustration among people that they just want something else. What else, what this thing else is, we don't really know yet, because obviously the proper policies of this new creature are not crystal clear yet, but apparently there is a palpable and measurable frustration among people. So what is the response to an increasingly authoritarian regime then? Well, they start to threaten the public life, they start to threaten all those entities who might enable this new challenger to come to power next year when we have the next parliamentary elections, and they increasingly threaten that they are going to somehow block by law this new party to run at all, and so on. So I think that getting back to this question, what is the autocratic trajectory? This is clear authoritarian trajectory. Unfortunately, this is not a Hungarian invention. We have seen it many times in other places. But yet again, getting back to yesterday's discussion, when you see the danger and you don't want to believe this danger is coming to your house until it actually comes to your house, you didn't believe it on time.
And one of the things that I cannot really comprehend from the outside is I'm reading these, good articles in The Atlantic. I'm reading opinion pages in the New York Times, Washington Post, and I don't have the feel that there is a real concern in the opposition, and I don't see the concern within the opposition inside the Republican Party. It's like, okay, this is happening, we don't like it, but, there is no feeling of search, of kind of urgent search. Is this
how much American social media do you follow, and how many American Democratic politicians do you follow?
Yeah, that's the question. Is this something that we don't see because of the optics, or is this something where the system works differently? There
are two things. One is that it's not a parliamentary system, and so there is no leader of the opposition, and there won't be. There will not be one person who emerged. And by the way, this is also a kind of authoritarian instinct. I keep hearing this. Who is the leader? Who is the leader? Well, there won't be a leader. I mean, there will be eventually another presidential candidate, but until then, there's no leader. That's not how our system works. There are many people, actually, members of Congress, senators, but also people on the local level, people in the media, people with podcasts. All kinds of people are writing very alarming stuff all the time. I mean, once you're on the right Instagram algorithm, you'll see it. But if you're not in the Instagram algorithm, you might not see it, and that's another issue for today. But there is a lot of.
I'm too centrist.
there's a lot of. You would have to, you would have to start following particular people, and then you'll see more of it. There have been a bunch of nationwide protests, and there's a group that's planning more of them, and they'll start to be regular. That's all palpable. The second thing, though, is that also in our system, actually, the thing that people are really angry at the Democrats for is that they can't stop it. But in our system, they don't have the tools to stop it. So there isn't, if you don't have Congress, then you don't have a way of preventing the executive from doing anything. So it isn't like they can physically stop what's happening. Thirdly, a lot of the cases, it's true that much of what Trump has done has been illegal, and a lot of those cases are moving through the court system now, and we're coming to the moment, we're sort of reaching it, haven't quite yet, when the courts will begin to block them. And I do think that will happen, actually. And then there'll be an interesting moment. Will the Trump administration try to overrun the courts? I don't know. We'll find out. Secondly, within the Republican Party, there's a weirder dynamic. I mean, you're right. There is some opposition inside the Republican Party. There are a lot of uncomfortable Republicans. But there's another thing that's happened there that I think is also not understood from the outside, which is that a lot of Republican politicians are scared, and they're not scared for reputational reasons. They're scared, physically scared. So they're worried that if they vote against the president and they go home to their state, Iowa or Idaho, or Utah, that they will be physically attacked or their kids will be harassed on the way home from school. So this is it, and this actually is maybe a new element in American politics, and this dates from the last 4 years.
And there's free firearms.
There are free firearms, and people are genuinely frightened. And there are a lot of Republicans left Congress and left politics for this reason. Because it was certainly of all the people who voted for Trump's impeachment in either the House or the Senate, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but most of them are gone. Most of them are out of politics now. Either they were forced out like Liz Cheney, or they quietly left. Their attitude might begin to change as public opinion in their districts begins to change, which there's some evidence of that happening. So you may see that soon too. But I would, we're at a moment in US politics when so much of the assumptions have changed, so many of the rules have changed, and so many of the norms of politics are different, that you can't really blame people for needing more than 3 months to readjust what they're doing. If the old left-right division doesn't really make sense anymore, the division over, the things that the Republicans were supposed to be in favor of versus things that Democrats were supposed to be, that's all changed as well. And so it will take a little bit of time for people to readjust and for the opposition party to readjust and so on. But in the meantime, people are anxious and angry, and they're making a lot of noise. I mean, as a journalist, you also have to decide what kind of tone to take. And personally, for example, I didn't feel that it's useful for me to sound hysterical or upset or angry. I mean, I just try to say what I think is happening. I don't think it's useful to scream and yell. Maybe other people think differently.
So we mistake politeness for lack of
It's not politeness.
urgency.
It's not about politeness. It's more what's effective. If I were to stand here right now and start shrieking about Donald Trump, you would all wave your hands and say, this is not interesting. I mean, there's an effective way to speak, and this is very important for journalists, actually. There's an effective, clear way to speak where you rely on stuff that's actually happening, and then there's fear-mongering and anxiety building. I try not to do that. Of course, everybody takes their own task. Another thing that's also important, people often say, what is the role of the media, or what is the media doing? There's a lot of media. What I do is different from what the Associated Press does, a wire service, and that's different from what CNN does, and that's different from what a blogger does, and it's different from what podcasters do. And there's a lot of media doing different things. And so when you're generalizing about what is the media doing or not doing, that's not very useful. It's very important to be specific. Which media are you talking about? I'm always being told, for example, you always read on social media, how come the media isn't writing about corruption? I mean, I write about it, lots of people write about it. Maybe the piece of the media that you're following isn't writing about it, but, the New York Times had a huge, 5-page spread on it last week. How come you didn't read that? So people tend to draw broad conclusions about the media without actually paying that close attention to what media actually does.
So let me ask a specific question about what media actually does. Is the CNN being the preferred Democratic voice and Fox News being the preferred Republican voice, is this the end of independence? And are we going into pluralism as an alternative? Or the independence, editorial independence, is still a value? Is it still being pursued or should be pursued?
Yeah, first of all, CNN is not the voice of the Democratic Party at all, and CNN has made an effort to do something a little bit different, which isn't quite working. But both CNN, Fox, MSNBC. It is true that 10 years ago, all of those networks felt as if they had more editorial independence than they do now, and they used a more neutral tone. They presented discussions in a more neutral way, but that was also because we were living at a moment when politics was less polarized and people were less angry. And the business model now of quite a lot of media is to appeal to your base, and you will make money if you build the base, and if you appeal to the partisan part of the population. And the business model of neutrality, which was designed to appeal to a broader base, has in most cases failed. And so yes, what you're watching is this increasing partisanship, but this is also not unheard of in Ukraine. I mean, or other parts of the world. When I was starting out in journalism, the Washington Post was pretty much the only newspaper in Washington. And that meant that the Washington Post had an interest in appealing to a wide readership. It wanted Republicans to read the Post. They wanted Democrats to read it, but they also wanted local businesses to advertise in the Post. It was a kind of monopoly. I mean, somebody once described it to me like a public utility. It was like the gas company or the pipeline company. That's not true anymore. There is no business model whereby you win over a broad swathe of people with neutral commentary, and so you've had this siloing of newspapers as well as TV. And no, of course it's not good. I mean, there are some things that have been gained. I mean, the neutrality sometimes concealed laziness, or it concealed a refusal to be clear. There were some things that were lost in that earlier period that we don't miss. But yeah, I think the partisanship has been dictated in a way by the business atmosphere.
My final two questions are basically more related to Ukraine, because in the case of Ukraine, one of the unconventional things that we have in Ukraine is a strong public broadcaster. And the question is public broadcaster a potential source of stabilization of the entire media market? Is that important to have an independent public broadcaster for the private media to thrive and be less dependent on the niche platforms, ideological platforms? Do you think so?
I think if you can have it, and as Hungary proves, actually, it's very easy to undermine the independent public, or can be easy to undermine the independent public broadcaster if you don't have good laws. But if you can have it, and if it is able to build a wide trust, something like the BBC, although even the BBC has lost trust in recent years, if you're able to do it, then it is one of the things that can keep politics centered. I mean, even the fact that the BBC has, it's a little bit fake, but during election campaigns, they insist on every political program has a member of each party on a panel. This is really useful. You don't have that on Fox News. And having that, having somebody who's legally obliged to at least try to be neutral can be extremely important. And of course, this is a thing we don't have in the United States at all. We have sort of a public broadcaster, but it's very niche, and it's not even fully government funded. It's partly just independently funded. And the lack of that, there's right now no media forum in America where everybody will agree to go on it and everybody will watch it. I mean, maybe the presidential debates are the only thing left that has that.
Dorka?
Yes, it is absolutely vital, because otherwise, look at what happens if you do not preserve your public broadcaster. Of course, that is not the only source of the problems in Hungary, but clearly an indicator that something is off. So yes, exactly because of the already mentioned processes. So unfortunately, yes, we live in an era where polarization is just growing. And unfortunately, this is a vicious circle, because for newspapers to stay alive, for financial reasons, and not only, it is a lot easier to talk for the core supporters. And that core, by default, by the rules of physics, that kind of center, or that kind of core they are talking to, is going to be slowly more and more radical on both sides, unfortunately. So this is happening. And unfortunately, these kind of news then further increase the polarization. So unfortunately, yes, this is really a vicious circle. And if you can have a public broadcaster which can allow itself to not go for emotions, to be as maybe dry, as professional, but probably less interesting than than those kind of outlets which live purely from the market, then you have to preserve it, unfortunately, because there is no other way around.
We've been discovering how bad the situation is and how it deteriorates, and that there might or might not be a light in the end of the tunnel. But, considering that Ukraine is still trying to Euro-integrate or Euro-Atlantically integrate, and seeing the dissolution of the institutions in the US, in many European countries, my last question to you, are we screwed?
No. I mean, I think the answer is that you should be democratizing Ukraine and building institutions in Ukraine, not in order to get into the EU or in order to be someday accepted to NATO. You should do it because it's good for Ukraine.
We understand that.
It's not, and following the lead of other countries or seeking to appeal to them, it's a fool's game. There's no point to it.
We understand that. The question is that without an international network of support, considering that we are at war, considering the challenges that we have, considering the amount of pain inside the Ukrainian society, we're actually risking of not having democracy sustainable, not because we cannot sustain it as a society, but because we cannot sustain it as a society in the given circumstances. So the question is how reliably we should account that there will be external support for the cause of democracy and for the cause of freedom in Ukraine.
I mean, I can't tell you what will happen in the distant future. I mean, for right now, you have very, very strong support in Europe from the current European leaders. And you saw it, they were here, they were in Kiev a few days ago. There's that fantastic photograph of your president, President Macron, the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister of Poland, all standing in a row, talking and looking happy and friendly. And I think that was real. It was among that group, there is a commitment to to Ukraine, to the sovereignty of Ukraine, to the democracy of Ukraine. The Germans have just raised their spending limit, which is unheard of in Germany, in order to buy weapons. All kinds of things are happening inside the other countries as well. And that's real. And I think you can count on that at the moment. And I would consider those countries your friends. You also have, remember, inside the United States, you have friends in Congress, you have friends in the general public, you have friends in the business community. There are other people who are still supporting Ukraine, even including with money and including politically, all across the country. And so I wouldn't count the U.S. out yet either.
Dorka, what does your gut feeling tell you?
I wish I could just look into my crystal ball and tell you the future. Obviously, I cannot. But frankly speaking, I'm not pessimistic. I think exactly because Ukraine has shown so much strength, and you can clearly see bad examples, you know what to avoid. And I also see that the European support, especially with the current leadership of the European Union, is actually there. Is there, and they themselves also see the bad examples. And for instance, with regards to Hungary, I can clearly see and tell with great confidence that you can see that the EU is slowly but surely finding its teeth. So we can see that, yes, in many aspects, especially for all those reasons which I mentioned, that there were many problematic things which should have been solved a lot earlier. When the EU behaved as a toothless lion, I don't really think that they have seen many future consequences in time. But now we can clearly see that at many different levels, the EU is actually starting to see the problems, and the lion is growing teeth. So I think that in this aspect, sorry for stealing the word from you, but in this aspect, this is coming very handy for Ukraine. So I think that, yes, you can clearly count on this.
I feel like the party of pessimists was not represented at this show. But let me take 3 blitz questions. Please ask the questions the way you don't have to provide PhD thesis here to respond. 3 questions in a row. To our wonderful panelists. Please, you're first. Yep. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dina Vanilunets. You've mentioned the Instagram algorithm earlier, and in terms of institutional decline, I wanted to ask Anne, do you think that there is crucial necessity for public institutions, thinkers, strategists beyond social media like Instagram and TikTok? Because here in Ukraine, most of those people think that we don't like that auditory, we don't like people being on Instagram and TikTok. What do you think about these things?
Thank you. Another question right there in the back.
Thank you. My name is Yulia, Center for Information Resilience. I want to come back to your point on anti-enlightenment, and it hit me a bit because I think your opponents and Trump administration actually claim that they are living in real world. They're talking about diversity and inclusion, and they ask to come back to science. They're talking of trans rights, ask to come back to science. So there are 2 different scientific, as they claim, realities. And given that autocrats are not really interested in breaching polarization in a society, I feel like that's Democrats who have to do it. How do you explain this complexity of democratic world to the audience who is not necessarily yours already? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the 3rd question right there. No, please use the microphone. Doesn't work. That won't be recorded if you shout. Just get my microphone, please.
Thank you.
One really important topic that hasn't come up in talking about democracy is shared values. And I'm from Australia, and one of the shared values are very strong in Australia, like the shared values of the fair go and support other people and safety nets and pick people up when they're down. And that's a real muscle tissue of democracy that holds institutions up and gets people called to account. and there's more that I could list, but you get the idea. And what can be done in Ukraine to lift the shared values so that bad gets called out and good gets lifted up?
So I can answer the question about social media because I've thought a lot about it myself. I have I'm very well aware of how unfair and even damaging these algorithms are. And in particular, we know that Twitter has now been recast so that it favors the far right, so that it favors pro-Russian narratives. We know that TikTok is run in mysterious ways by its Chinese owners, possibly to favor the undermining of confidence in the American political system. So I mean, there are very deep, uncomfortable questions about what these things really are. If we were in a different place and we had different political leaders, what would we be talking about now is a way to make algorithms more transparent, to have a public conversation about what they are and how they work, to ask whether they're serving society, not in order to censor people, but just simply to ask to make it public. And actually, some of the EU laws on digital regulation are designed to do exactly that. Nobody's yet really had the courage to apply them, but maybe that will eventually happen. However, given that we are where we are, and this is where people get their information, I tend to think that if people can do it, if they have the bandwidth to do it, they should try to be on them. If you want to reach people in the place that they're getting their news, that's where they are. So I'm not on TikTok, partly just because I do think it's a Chinese influence operation, and I just, I don't even want it on my phone. But I do try to take part in other social media. So recently I make a bigger effort on Instagram, even though I don't spend any time looking at it, but I try to think, how do I reach people who watch it? How do I communicate in a way? So I think a little bit more about it than I used to do. And I also see around me some people who are even more effective. And I don't know if he's followed here, Ezra Klein, who's a New York Times columnist, and runs a podcast and has recently begun to do these kind of speaking to camera short videos that I now see in different places, and they seem to me very effective or anyway very professionally produced. And so I see he's somebody who is a natural writer, intellectual analyst, who is trying to reach people in a different way. And I think anyone who has again, it takes time, sometimes it takes money, it takes effort, if not everybody has that. But if you can do it, it's worth trying because, as I say, that's where people, especially younger people, are getting information. It doesn't mean that I approve of Instagram or I think that it's a fantastic company.
Did you pick up the other questions?
Not really. I will pick up also this one. So I think that this really I think that this is a really good thing. So obviously, institutions are always going to have structural disadvantage in this race. Of course, who likes bureaucracy? Who likes faceless institutions? People don't even know what they work on. But if we can give faces, if we can make the whole image likable, then people might start to be interested in, wow, okay, so what does this institution do at all? Why is it good for me? If we can translate it to very simple, very easy messages, then they might care when an autocrat might come and want to destroy it. So, for instance, I mean, there are several good examples for that. For instance, the EU has an institution. It's called the Committee of Regions. Who has ever heard about it? Not too many people, because altogether this really operates on lower level, kind of connects municipalities with each other whatsoever. But, for instance, they have a really likable Instagram page. They have really likable social media platforms, social media profiles and accounts. And it's really easy to relate to them. So, for instance, if people at least know about them, they might care more when the ruler might come for these institutions. So I think it's definitely worth a try.
Well, part of the adult's life is knowing that not all of the questions will be answered and we won't get the closure. There is no closure. So, Dorka Takácsy, Anne Applebaum, thank you very much for being here. Please applaud to our incredible guests. I guess we have to continue working and asking questions. Thank you.